I love that part when we gather and when everybody's engaged in conversation. If we ever lose that dynamic, we're hurting people. It's always nice to witness it, especially in church gatherings, that we're a very oral culture and we're all into this together as friends. I want to begin. I'm Jim Lang. I come from the Diocese of Syracuse, your neighbor. And we've been twins in the planning process, if you will. We both started in the early 80s and have been walking the journey. You have walked it a little bit more deliberately than Syracuse has, but we caught up with you. And we caught up with you because of some fine mentoring. Indeed, I've told people that I'm here is a thank you for the many people, including Sister Kathleen Turley and Bishop Hubbard, who made their way to Syracuse when we were in the infancy stage, to say, let us share with you without imposing on you the Albany method so you have a way to begin to think about this. And the Albany method has, with a couple variations for local operations, become rather the national model. In fact, Dan and Mark and I know each other, first and foremost from a group that's called the Conference on Pastoral Planning and Council Development. That's a mouthful, but it's a group of people nationally who get together to discuss these issues related to research, planning, and council development, and the importance of the consultative task. And I dare say that my interest in it began not in this diocese. It was another diocese that I got conned into doing some planning in 1983, but it was inspired by what was going on in Albany. And I think I need to say thank you for that, and to acknowledge the role of our sister diocese. We know many of the same people, we work together, there's a lot of things that go on across the lines, and thank you for that. One of the things that we learned is that the global view from the diocese point of view is rather important, because we have the resources for training, and we can look after the little guy. At least if we're talking about my diocese, the little rural community of Boonville doesn't have a clue what's happening in the very large parish environment of Endicott. And you need the diocesan vision, the work that you do and do so well together, to make sure that there's a coordination of the efforts. And yet at the same time, you have learned through the struggle. I'd like to suggest that we've all been walking this journey together. We have all learned that the input and wisdom and understanding of the local pastoral situation that belongs to the parish and the cluster of parishes in which it is involved is critical to our planning process. Indeed, the local planners, if they decide they're not going to go with the stream, we've failed. And we've all had the same kind of exasperating experiences. And I look at what you did when you had the first planning round and say, that was some challenging times, but as we've each gone through multiple processes, what we've discovered is the level of understanding of our faith community has shifted with us, and we understand we're in a transitional time. I take this to be a very positive thing. I look back over the long range of church history, and I say, I can spot in church history, whether it's the shift from the apostles to the fathers of the church, or into the period of monasticism, or the mendicant movement, or into the age of dioceses. We've gone through a lot of shifts historically, and we can get through this one because we're on pilgrimage together. And not only are we on pilgrimage, we've learned some lessons along the way. One of them is expressed by my brother Brian, who's a priest. And some of you know Syracuse. He's the pastor of St. Charles and St. Anne's on either side of Bishop Ludden High School. And when he went there, the place was $1.6 million in debt. And the parishes had intense dislike for each other, largely because they were afraid to be gobbled up. That sound familiar to anybody? And he found out that if he took his time and did town meetings and spoke the same truth consistently in an ongoing way and did his focus on building a community and building the collaborative processes within those communities, that things would come along. Well, eventually the parishes asked him if they could be one legal parish with 2 worship sites. And now they've made it to the point where they're talking about building a new church suitable for both, and he's $1 million in the bank. That suggests the commitment of the people of God and a buy-in to the vision. So the local and the diocesan planning processes both are terribly important, and we have the resources at a diocesan level to supply the support and training people need to be able to walk through the storm and to do it well. A little bit about our background now. And the little bit is that 12 years ago, the Lilly Endowment said, we have $125 million we want to spend. So we'd like proposals from you about how we ought to spend it. The process was going to be called Sustaining Pastoral Excellence. In 6 groups, familiar to all of you, the Conference on Pastoral Planning, the National Association of Lay Ministry, the National Federation of Priest Councils, the National Association of Youth and Young Adult Ministries, the National Association for Church Personnel Directors, and the National Association of Directors of the Permanent Diaconate, sent a note and said, we're Catholics and we want to see if we can collaborate. And John Wimmer from the Lilly Foundation wrote back and said, oh, that sounds like a unique experience. Send us a plan. So we did send a plan. And the plan involved all kinds of research, and it involved a major summit in Orlando in 2008 on ministry. And when we got done with phase 1, which was a 5-year process, they turned to us and said, you did so well with the first process, what if we gave you more money? And we said we'd spend it. And we designed another process. And part of what you're hearing today, at least in some focal point, is that Mark, who's going to talk about multiple parish ministry, started in the first one with research about what is it like to be the pastor of a multiple parish. And then in the second one, and I was able to participate in this study with him, is what's the impact on staffs and parishes of being in a multiple parish situation. And that means recreating, if you will, the famous 1989 study of Notre Dame. So we brought in the people from CARA, the Center for Applied Research and the Apostolate, also familiar to all of you, and they recreated it, and Mark changed the metrics so you can easily redo the study again, and we can move that along. Alongside that, we also did a research on the relationship between parish business managers, parish finance councils, and parish pastoral councils, with the emphasis of the later two of, when it comes to parish budgeting, how do you take the vision of the parish and put it next to the temporalities of the parish in a way that makes sense, and you bring it together so that people have a joint ownership of how the parish is moving forward and what the processes are that will move them to their next step, even though you can't do everything at once. Well, I've wondered, what did the Lillies get for their $125 million? Are you ready? Here's the 3 principal findings of sustaining pastoral excellence. Number 1, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. People need, want, and are trying to develop within their lives a sense of the sacred. John Wimmer, who's the chairman of the Lilly Foundation, stood up holding, and he's a Methodist minister. He stood up with a rum and breviary and he said, I got to tell you what I've discovered during the last 10 years. This is called the Liturgy of the Hours. It's a Roman Catholic practice. I've regained an important part of my faith practice. Don't abandon that when you're doing your planning, he says to the Christian churches of America. That would be worth $125,000, right? $125 million if we took seriously, here's the finding and how do we align our mission as church, diocesan, and church parish in bringing about just this change. Then the next step was, the most important way for people to learn is in small groups. That's where the dynamic of trust develops, and that's when people begin to learn together. And it doesn't make any difference whether it's a Little Rock Bible series or it's another form of adult education, or to use the example of SU has got a knitting group, a group that does those panels. And SUNY Oswego has got something that started out as a knitting group, and students began to join it too, but they call it Stitch and Bitch. But in the sense, what they do is they're forming smaller communities, and as we all know, a parish is a community of communities. So that would have been worth $125 million. But then what I thought was probably, I almost fell off my chair. You're going to love this one because we're Catholics and we got this market not cornered, but it's such a part of our tradition, we should be able to adopt it pretty easily. The observation was made is we're no longer human beings. We have turned into human doings. Now tell whether or not you're important by how busy you are. How are you today, Fred? Real busy, Jim, real busy. Whatever happened to you being human beings? So the number one discovery of the Lilly Endowment's $125 million investment in sustaining pastoral excellence is recover Sabbath. Help people to be human beings again. Now, it probably seems strange to start talking about consultative processes by starting with the three primary discoveries of the pastoral excellence process, but it seems to me that's the only reason we're planning. Sometimes, at least in the Diocese of Syracuse, and I would never suggest this happens in Albany, the planning process turns into which buildings are staying open or what way parishes are going to get used. Well, if our mission determines how we set diocesan priorities, then it seems to me if we look at those three and take just that lesson and brought them into each of our dioceses, it would entirely reorient our planning process. Now, I always make some quick notes for pastoral leaders. My first message yesterday to your new parish leaders was this: take time off. Take time for prayer, and as I'm sure will be reiterated, if you have a charism in the Lord, whether it's working with young people or old people or fire departments or carnies, whatever that charism is, you are robbing the Spirit of the Spirit's impact in your life of the quality it can have if you don't find a way to exercise your charism. I think any spiritual director would tell you that. But how many people are too busy to exercise their charism? We have a sense? Then, take this time, and everybody in the room can do this. We listen to homilies, we read theology, we engage in classes. Have you developed your own practical theology yet? If somebody said to you, what do you think about this phenomena of Jesus? Or some question related to it. Have you developed your own personal theology, and do you bring that personal practical theology into the planning process, or do you join me as having been far too marinated by American business culture? Because it's really easy for us to become marinated. And evolving a personal sense of theology and expressing it is part of the planning process. It seems to me is at the heart of who we are. In fact, it shows ourselves in the way we pray. When your pastoral council gathers, when you gather as a group, when your finance council gathers, that might be a really important part of the question. Do you have a perfunctory prayer and say, okay, what's agenda item number 1? Or do you take some time and develop the group as a faith community? Remember, the third finding of the Lilly Endowment was what? Small group learning. What better place do you have to form a Christian community of disciples than in the manner in which you pray as you begin your meetings? Does it mean the meeting is going to take half an hour longer? Probably. But I discovered with the Lilly Endowment processes that if we took time for Lectio, our relationship as people grew, our openness to the Spirit grew, our openness to one another grew, and we had far better opportunities to design and to think about the whole church. So don't be afraid to pray and to get away from perfunctory prayer. And then the note for us as diocesan leaders and as pastoral leaders, it seems to me, says, whatever we do, do it consistently, do it clearly, do it without being wishy-washy, speak the truth with a great deal of consistency. And if indeed you have to hear it 7 times before anybody actually in listening hears it, then the fact that you're taking the time to say it in the same way, with the same clarity, the same love, and the same joy 7 different times means that in the long run, you're becoming a better form of yeast for the whole diocese. Another thing that we try to say to folks is very simple. You can't do it alone, and you shouldn't do it alone. It's about an us, not an I. Now, if you have looked at this, and you may have discovered at your place, is the PowerPoint of this presentation, Jesus is hiding behind the curtain. So, what else did we discover? What did the emerging models of parish leadership learn? First, what we learned is that there aren't any cookie cutters. What we're going through is organic, it's evolving, it's responsive to local needs, and it's mission-driven. And so, whatever we can do to learn from the success of one another, from best practices, the better off we are. Why did I come to Albany to learn things in the 80s and early 90s? You had developed best practices. Do they look the same in Syracuse if they look in Albany? Depends on the parish community, because they took it. And thankfully, our diocesan process is allowed to hear what was going on in other dioceses. As it continues, what kind of church is emerging? We've already seen that the church has changed monumentally through the course of its history. What does the new one look like? Now, these 4 characteristics are challenging. They are not the way we are used to responding to things. But what the research said is we're becoming co-responsible, and that may be because it's one of the side effects of a diminished number of priests and sisters. We are purposely and intentionally calling forth new kinds of leadership from other people and finding they have great wisdom and sometimes spiritual lives that are far deeper than our own. That's perhaps the most humbling experience of all, to recognize the quality of the faith life of some of the people we have the privilege to work with. We're building a collaborative church. Collaboration is hard work. We keep on wanting to go to a vote. If you want to go to a vote, you probably still got another 4 days to go to reach consensus. Go for consensus. We're developing a collegial church. And my understanding as a former campus minister, and a current one too in some ways, in a collegial system, the person who's got the gifts and the training does the job. The general may not know how to do what the private does. If it's the private's job, let the private do it. Capiche? And we're going to start paying a lot more attention to charisms. They're not going to outrank office probably, but they're going to exist alongside of office in a very powerful way. And that's what's going to emerge as a new church. And what will the outcome be? I guarantee you, no one in the room knows. But what does Francis tell us? Be prepared to be surprised by the Spirit. Oh, but that is a little bit of an uncomfortable wait, isn't it? Oops, helps if I push the right button. Dave DeLambo, who wrote all the original research literature on the emerging phenomena of lay ecclesial ministry, said that his biggest discovery has been that our church is to be intentional. It's going to be increasingly complex, as if everybody in this room doesn't already, and all 3 rooms don't already know that, and that we're all going to be focused on vitality. Dennis Shemsko, who's written in the last 2 issues of Worship Magazine, says, we've gone through a fascinating paradigm shift. This has got to affect our planning process. We have gone from people identifying themselves as Christian and meaning that they align with a certain institutional view of church, or faith community to a church that now to a people that now defines Christianity by being part of an evangelical organization with a fluid structure. How do we Catholics respond to that? Isn't that part of our planning issue? So the challenges are multiple. Evangelization is going to be our hallmark. We're going to look differently than in the past. And as in the past, gospel witness is always going to be our strong point. These are some national resources you have at your place because they're in the slide presentation. You also have something from John Cusick there that offers a beginning to a planning process. John is a youth and young adult minister for the Archdiocese of Chicago. There are 7 points he raised. He said, this is how you can tell the health of your parish, and this may give you a direction in how you move forward. And question number 1 is, what's the reputation of your parish? So last summer, we sent our parishioners, our planning groups out and said, find out what people are talking about your parish. Then discover whether or not you like it. Let me give you an example of how this gets played out. In one diocese, I will admit repentantly that it's the Diocese of Syracuse. For about years, somebody answered the phone. It was Chancery. Oh, isn't that a warm greeting? But if you call the Archdiocese of Miami, this is what happened. Good morning. Thank you for calling the Archdiocese of Miami. May peace be with you. Stop the conversation, and it's repeated in Spanish. Which one is fulfilling its mission? My mic is getting lost. And Francis, on planning, I gave you a copy of this talk as well. Is this one working? Okay. At Aparecida, he said to the bishops of South America, and you see that there are 6 points in what he says. He said, what we're about is open, meaningful, collaborative dialogue, not that which pretends to be. The people of God need a real voice in designing their faith communities. And then he says, at one point as you glance down the page, and I fear in this matter, we have failed. I need to pick up speed, but later I'll tell you the story of Francis and the Swiss Guard. Please remind me, because that story is priceless. And you will have copies of his meditation with the curial staff, which is important to every parish staff and every diocesan staff. And we should also acknowledge that it's not quite what the press got. The press sort of overstated it. It was an Advent meditation, a well-placed one, and I think we can all afford to learn from it. Now, step 1, parish pastoral councils. Here's the problem, I think, at least in the Diocese of Syracuse. I can't speak for the Diocese of Albany. Everybody remember Monsignor Joe Champlin? Well, back when we reorganized our diocese in the Bishop Harrison administration, we decided that we were going to go for the law of analogous bodies, so that if the diocese had a vicar for parishes, the local region did too. So our deaneries or vicariates also had vicars for parishes. And lo and behold, somehow this newly minted or relatively newly minted priest ended up associated with the great Joe Champlin. And you may remember that in the 70s, there was a lot of talk, in the 60s, there was a lot of talk about parish pastoral councils. But until the Code of 1983, nothing showed up that looked precisely like a church-based pastoral council model. So what did we do? And in fact, I was with Joe when he wrote the book, and we debated this in and out. His model ended up, we're going to look like a 501(c)(3). We're going to design it after a board of directors, constitutions, votes, and all of that good stuff. Anybody else afflicted by that memory? By the time the 1983 code came out, it was very clear that we didn't need to vote. We didn't need a constitution. What we needed was pastoral dialogue and people who were willing to work at it until there was a collaborative outcome that was based on consensus. And then, if it couldn't reach consensus, of course, the pastoral leader did what the pastoral leader always did, was bring it into prayer and make the best judgment that they could. But the fact of the matter is that there was a shift. And right now, my sense, at least in my diocese, is we're still struggling with that. So what does the pastoral council do? Well, you all know the answer to that one. It has a vote about tarring the driveway, right? Not so. Its attention is to be on the mission of the parish, with an eye on the future, with an ongoing evolution of the ministries of the parish, and to pay attention to the way the parish is perceived in the wider community. One of the importance of that is our parishes don't exist to serve Catholics. Our parishes exist so Catholics can serve the neighborhoods we're in. Wow, does that get lost in the pastoral planning of the Diocese of Syracuse at times. Again, it could go on for a while there, but I'll skip it for now. And so the pastoral council needs to identify what are the issues that we need to discuss and bring in expertise to help us to deal with that are going to articulate what our future is. So if you begin with the end in mind is that we're a community of saints. There's the code. The summary is this. Every pastoral council exists for 3 reasons: to investigate, to ponder, and to propose. It's a visioning body. And again, begin with the end in mind. When you form the council, who do you want to have there? I know there are a lot of strange practices for electing pastoral council meetings when you look at it as a national thing. Mark will come up with more ways than I will, but my very favorite way is to throw a whole pile of names into a hat and on Pentecost Sunday draw names so that you can blame the whole thing on the Holy Spirit. If the purpose of this group is to be the visionary body, to be the visionarium, if you will, then who's in the room counts. And you don't need a pile of lobbyists, you need a pile of skilled people. So, you're probably looking for some folks who are good at volunteer selection, training, and utilization. You're looking for wisdom figures and evangelizers. You're looking for people who understand hospitality and service, and looking for people who can look long range, and more than anything, you're looking for people who will tell you the truth. The defining mission, according to Pope Francis, is bring that group together. Tell Jesus, we trust you, and ask Jesus what he wants, and then be prepared for Jesus to show you and tell you. Part of the second part, a parish finance council. We have piles of research that's available to you on the emergingmodels.org website, or I'd be happy to supply it to you, but every parish is to have a finance council. It is a distinctly different body than the pastoral council. They are not the same entity, and they don't have the same people on them. So you ask, what kinds of people do you want there? Now, this is a wonderful tension that exists at the diocesan level and at the parish level, and indeed in the Vatican. Has anybody paid any attention to the challenge of the relationship between the Pope's Curia and something called the Institute or the bank? You know, the Vatican Bank? We all have the same levels of issues. It's all about stewardship and trust. So who do you need there? You need people who understand accounting and budgets, human resources, investing, legal issues, development and endowment. How many parishes are telling us how much difficulty they're having getting their resources to match their needs? Important part of planning. The physical plant and facilities expertise, like Syracuse, an awful lot of your beautiful buildings were purchased in a time when heat was cheap. Somebody who knows something about sales and marketing and public relations, communications, customer service. Now, how do you do that? Those you have to figure out, okay, let's brainstorm. Who's available to us? who are we going to go out and invite, and then bring into a training process, and then do our best to keep them enthusiastic and focused on making this a healthy organization so that you have not only spiritual sustainability, but you have fiscal sustainability. I also passed out to you New York State's religious corporation law. You have that in your pile. And I read yours yesterday and the day before, and your information about trustees is perfectly useful and helpful. I wanted to sneak my little lobbying job in to suggest that our trustees are very important. And there is a place where we got ahead of ourselves in Syracuse at least, and sometimes the trustees weren't exactly integral parts of the administrative structure of a parish. In fact, we got a resolution from somebody to build a parish center 35 years ago, and both of the people who signed it, the trustees, were dead. We developed a whole new attitude toward trustees since then, as you will see, and there's a role specification there, and it picks up on some issues that we all deal with, like where do you put the responsibility for the oversight of making sure the parish is carrying on the safe environment program of the parish. So we added it. And there may be Albany issues where you think one of the trustees ought to be paying attention to this. These are important people to parishes. They have a prestigious servant post, and to give them meaningful work to do is very important. Oh no, not another meeting. If you have just a visioning group and a finance group with your trustees, some people have said, what about the worker bees? What about the people who actually pull off the parish festival, who run the Sauerbraten dinner? Well, if you have a Sauerbraten dinner, please tell me where and when it is. But in the Southwest, particularly in California, they've adopted to a group that they call the Parish Ministry Council. It's the worker bees. Now, it's not here, so everybody in the diocese will run out and create a parish ministry council, because I suspect that you already have bodies that do this. This is a formalization of those bodies that come together to do the kinds of hands-on work you want, but it means you go to one meeting instead of 10. So it might be valuable to you. Then we have the question of, and this is a tension in most parishes that I know of, parish staff. I have no higher regard for people than for the folks who staff our rectories and their faith life and their dedication. Now, from a leadership standpoint and a diocesan planning standpoint, we do have an issue, don't we? And the issue is frequently the staff confuses themselves with being the consultative bodies. And the staff confuses itself and pretends to be the visioning body. And the staff confuses itself and tries to pretend that it's the finance council. Now, when you have that system happening, what's happened to the separation between consultative processes and management processes? You're better off with clean lines, I think. And so I suggest that, well, whatever envisioning processes you have, that they have the staff support to help them envision, that we make sure that we don't truncate the consultative processes of the entire parish by letting the staff take over all of the principal functions of consultation. That will take some guidance. When other priests and deacons are present, I apologize to the deacons that it doesn't say priests and deacons, because it started out thinking about guys who were living in rectories, but the fact of the matter is they need to be part of the process. They need to know what goals you're trying to achieve. Otherwise, you can end up like one of the parishes I was in, where people would call, this was in Baltimore, to find out which priest was celebrating Mass, because they had different theologies and different celebration styles, and so they called to find out when their favorite was going to be there. And you don't build a parish well that way. So here's the question. All of this is wonderful. Here's the visioning process. Here's the financial process. How do you produce a budget? This has been a fascinating question across the nation, because there's no real answer to the question, but I will share with you some of the insights. One diocese said what we recommend is that several times a year, parishes have parish town meetings. And that at the parish meetings, you will always describe what's going on in terms of the financial life, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But you also ask people if they have ideas about ways that ministries could be expanded, that they at least stand up and name them, so that the people who are going to vision and fund have an idea of what the people of God are thinking might be helpful. That made great sense to me, because you're not asking anybody to take a vote. You're asking people to put forth, identify a place that we're perhaps deficient or we could do better, and at the same time asking them for a plan for how they might move forward. That's a good place to start, because then you can bring it back in. In some places in the United States, the parish council chairman, facilitator, or president, and the chairman of the finance council meet with the pastor and do the first draft of a bishop and of the budget, and then they branch it out and bring it back to the consultative bodies and sometimes back to the parish before they produce the new budget. That's a lengthy process. But I suspect that if we have parishes that we're concerned about their temporalities and their care of them, if we take time, and as a diocese we mentor parishes on how to do this effectively, that we will end up with parishes that have a much deeper sense of their ownership of their budgeting process, and therefore probably also be much more generous in seeing it go through to success. You'll notice that I also passed out, and it's entitled, it depends on which side of the form you're on. One side of the page is PFC list. It's a list of documents that your parish finance council ought to have access to. There shouldn't be any secrets between pastors, parish leaders, and the finance committee. They can't tell you the truth if you don't begin by telling them the truth. And they're not your enemies, they're your collaborators. And they will spot the questions and raise the issues in time to help you wrestle with them meaningfully. And the other side of it is part of the study that concluded the study group for parish finance councils, and gives you a sense of where that line was drawn. It's on flip sides of a page. And this simply makes the statement, parishioners have a right to know the financial position of the parish. Whether you do that in the little boxes in the bulletin every week, or monthly, or quarterly, and certainly doing it in a yearly financial statement that's actually readable by somebody who doesn't have a CPA, that's important. So what we're inviting pastors to become is conductors, leaders of a philharmonic. This is a huge consultative process because the emphasis isn't on operating a business, it's on developing a community that has a business side to it, which we all respect and understand. We need the insurances, we need to apply all the laws, as Dan mentioned in his presentation, and Mark will too, but we're building a community of faith. Now, what's going to happen is Mark is next going to take this into what happens when we take this perfectly lovely large community or small community that's all well orchestrated and it turns into a multiple parish community. I conclude with this. I call it the Bernardine Corollary because I first heard it from Cardinal Bernardin. One day Joe said, "Always tell the truth. You have less to remember." Then I found out that the part I didn't know, it wasn't the Bernardine Corollary, it was a quote from Mark Twain. Again, it's a privilege to be here in the Diocese of Albany, and thank you.